Coming up, whether you're an enterprise or a service provider, we're going to take a look at Azure Stack integrated systems, the unique combination of optimized hardware, software, and services that delivers Azure with Azure Stack to your own data center. And as you take on the role as your own cloud operator, we'll explain the Azure Stack integrated systems approach and demonstrate the end-to-end IT experience, including planning the size of your system and setting yourself up for scale, configuring the system with your hardware partner, provisioning resources to your developers, plus ongoing management and monitoring. I'm joined today by Vijay Tewari from the Azure Stack engineering team. Welcome.
Thanks for having me on the show.
So we've covered Azure Stack in past shows. This really gives you a hybrid platform so that you can use the same services, automation tools, and portal as Azure Public Cloud, but your apps are actually running on-premises in your own data centers. And one area we haven't really explored in detail is really how Azure Stack is delivered and integrated within your own data center. So I'm excited to see the direction that you're taking now with Azure Stack integrated systems, but can you explain more about the approach that you're taking here?
Absolutely. As you mentioned, the premise of Azure Stack is to bring the core attributes we run in the public cloud of Azure into your data center. For example, if you want to move to the cloud and you're held back due to regulatory compliance, other technical or business reasons, this opens up new options for you to be able to move to the cloud yet operate Azure in your data center. We deliver Azure Stack as a purpose-built integrated systems that combines software, services, and hardware. And these are highly optimized systems that benefit from our learnings from the public cloud with agility at scale to provide a pragmatic hybrid cloud solution to you. And these can be obtained from our partners like Dell, HP, and Lenovo, and Cisco coming later this year. And as with the cloud, there are no upfront costs. You only pay for the Azure services that you use. And we also give you a full end-to-end support experience shared between us and our partners.
All right, so let's make this real, because if you're watching at home, I bet people are wondering, what's the experience to get all this stuff up and running in my own data center?
Sure, so let's try and walk through what it means, through a day in the life of getting Azure Stack running in your data center.
Okay.
The first step is to work with your hardware partner to plan the size of your system based on the needs of your apps and services.
Do you have guidance in terms of the size when I start planning for my system, the initial kind of rollout?
So you can decide up front, what is the size of your scale unit. This is a group of servers that you can start with as small as 4, and it can be as large as 12 servers. Soon, you'll be able to add capacity to a scale unit by adding more servers, and then you'll be able to add regions. Think of regions as a geographical area that you define, which you'll be able to add to your Azure Stack instance. And then you'll be able to add multiple scale units per region. And as you can see, just like Azure, Azure Stack is architected for scale, and we are delivering incrementally in this area.
All right, so let's put this into context here. What do I get for, say, a 12-server set of Azure Stack servers?
So if you have a 12-server system with the right CPUs, with the right amount of memory and the right amount of storage, you can get about 400 plus Azure D2 size VMs with the right amount of resiliency. Now, a D2 size VM is 2 virtual CPUs and 7 gigabytes of memory. So as you can see, it's a pretty significant amount of capacity.
Plus it's got redundancy built in, but once I've determined the size of the system, what do I do next?
So next, you'll need to share your required configuration so that the hardware partner can build a system that's operational in your environment by completing a deployment worksheet with your information, such as Azure Active Directory, your network settings, and other information that's required for you customizing the system for your environment.
Okay, so I've shared the specs out with my hardware partner. How do I know the system's actually ready to go and usable?
So our hardware partner ships the hardware to your data center, and along with it come some engineers who will then deploy and integrate the system into your environment. They will then validate it to make sure it is operational in environment before they hand over the system to you. Now, Azure Stack is one system in your sea of other systems, but it's not an island. You can work with your system integrator to make sure that you can connect Azure Stack monitoring and identity subsystems to your centralized systems.
Okay, and once I've got all this stuff up and running, how do I start to provision services out to my customers, my developers in-house? and really manage that with my organization?
Right, so let's start by actually first looking at an Azure portal. Now this is the Azure portal. As a tenant, I'm consuming resources from the Azure portal, and this is the Azure Stack portal. Now by virtue of the consistency between an Azure and Azure Stack, you get the same functionality between Azure and Azure Stack. But along with Azure Stack, we also ship an administrative portal, and that administrative portal allows you to manage services in your data center. Now, Azure Stack comes with a bunch of foundational services out of the box, infrastructure as a service, with compute, storage, with blobs, tables, and queues, and networking. And in your local gallery, you can select the services that you want to be able to expose. You can actually go to Azure, and you can actually select services from Azure that you want to bring down into your data center and actually bring them down and make them and expose them to your developers from your local gallery.
Okay.
You then need to go and set offers, plans, and quotas, which is how you encapsulate the services that you want to be able to provide to your developers. And then you can set quotas as to how much of the services they can actually consume from that particular offer and plan.
So you really are a cloud operator here. Now, once it's up and running, your developers start to consume resources, but how do I go about operating all of this, operating Azure Stack in general?
So as you can see, this is the Azure Stack administrative portal, and this gives you the health of all your resources. As you can see, I happen to have one region in this Azure Stack instance, and I'm seeing a warning. Let's click on the alert and see what that alert is telling me. So the alert is showing me that a physical disk and its connectivity has been lost to that disk. And if you look at the details of that alert, it is clearly telling you a set of steps that you can take to remediate that alert. Okay. It's asking you to reseat the disk, and if that doesn't work, to reach out to your hardware partner to actually replace the disk. Now, by virtue of the resiliency that the system has, the system is absolutely continuing to operate. So that's one of the benefits that you get out of a integrated system for Azure Stack.
So you said something interesting earlier. You're actually only paying for what you use, even though you've got capital and infrastructure in your own data center. But how do I keep track of all the resources and things that people are consuming? And ultimately, what I then, as the IT department, need to pay for?
So just like other Azure services, you can watch this consumption in the Azure portal or use the API to get a sense of what is the consumption in your environment.
So how do we go about getting the alert that you're showing here to actually appear in my other data center management and operations tools?
So all our administrative tasks are actually available via an API or a PowerShell that allows you to integrate this into your existing management tools in your data center, like Nagios or System Center Operations Manager. So here, I'm actually showing an instance of Operations Manager where I've imported the Azure Stack management back, and you can see the alerts from an Azure Stack instance being surfaced into your Operations Manager environment.
So we've covered monitoring performance with hardware and the support there, but what happens if there's a software bug or an issue that we have to report?
So it's a simple model. So just like for the hardware, from a software perspective, if one of the core services is faulty, you'll get an alert in the environment, and you'll be given a simple set of steps to be able to take to remediate that. However, if that doesn't work, then you can actually go to the Azure portal and you can raise a new support request. I'm actually here in the Azure portal, and as you can see, I've selected my subscription, and I'm selecting Azure Stack to be able to raise a new support ticket. Now, this support ticket is received by us in the backend, and we'll triage it between us and the partners and make sure that you get a seamless experience between us and the partner.
Okay, makes sense. And I saw early, I think I saw at least, there was a software update that was pending. How does that work, given that we want to keep that consistency between Azure Stack and Azure Public Cloud?
So as you can see here, there is an alert that you can see here which refers to the fact that there is an update that's available for Azure Stack. And our updates can contain security fixes, they can contain fixes for issues that were found in the product, or they can contain new capabilities.
And how does the actual software update process work?
Now, since we have a well understood and defined architecture between us and the hardware partner, we can orchestrate the application of the updates in a manner that ensures there is minimal downtime for the workloads and the services that are running on Azure Stack. For example, when we are updating a host, we can drain all the virtual machines that are running on a particular physical host, update that host, and then rehydrate this host with the virtual machines that were moved to a different machine while the system was being patched.
Makes sense, but how often do I expect updates to be rolling in, and is there a way I can defer them?
So our goal is to be able to ship updates as frequently as is required by the customer. But as a customer, you have the choice of being able to defer an update for up to 6 months.
So let's switch gears a little bit to disaster recovery. Since we're maintaining this consistency with Azure and Azure Stack, can I use Azure to be a DR solution for my Azure Stack instance?
Yes, you can actually fail over your virtual machines from Azure Stack to Azure. By setting up this relationship, you can replicate virtual machines from Azure Stack to Azure. And in the case of the failure of an Azure Stack instance, you can then spin up those workloads in Azure and continue in the face of disaster.
So it's great to see all the progress that we've made so far with Azure Stack, but what's next?
So there are 3 areas that you'll see us delivering on soon. The first is around expanding your Azure Stack infrastructure so that, for example, you can have different regions followed by multiple scale units, as I had mentioned earlier. Secondly, we are working on more purpose-built monitoring and alerts and intend to integrate it with Azure Log Analytics and OMS. Lastly, we will integrate the automation of firmware updates into our patching and update framework.
So thanks, Vijay, for taking us through all the different practicalities of getting Azure Stack running in our own data centers, but where can people go to learn more?
You can learn more at the link below and work with your hardware partner to start planning your Azure Stack integrated system.
So this is really good stuff, and also keep watching Microsoft Mechanics for the latest technology updates across Microsoft. That's all the time we have for this show. Thanks for watching, and goodbye for now.